You can ask about it, but nobody knows the way. No breadcrumb trail to follow through your days. It takes an axe sometimes, a feather in the sunshine and bad weather. It's a matter of getting deeper in any way you can. All this beauty.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Balloon. Welcome to Jeannie on the Beat, Talking with the Talent, Ann Arbor's news talk variety show, where I'll bring you up close and personal with fabulous writers, performers, and other fascinating folks. My guest tonight is University of Michigan Professor Emeritus Richard Mann. Professor Mann has been teaching the highly successful course Psychology and Spiritual Development since 1977. He also teaches workshops open to the public on non-ordinary experiences. Welcome, Dick. It's great to have you here.
It's very nice to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. So can you share with us a little about your background and how it brought you to where you are today?
Sure. I came here in the 60s, and I had many years of being involved with the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and the anti-racism movements of the 60s and early 70s. And I think that was sort of my passion outside of teaching, which is my long-term passion. I love to teach, and yet I always have something else going that's very exciting. In the middle 70s, I took my life took a turn because a great Indian teacher, Swami Muktananda, came to Ann Arbor, and I just decided I wanted to meet one of these great people. And I went to meet him, and I had great experiences with him. And one of the things he said that first week that he was here was, well, if you want to promote peace, how can you promote peace if you don't have any peace inside yourself? Well, that kind of struck home, because we were definitely in a state of not being very peaceful ourselves, although we might have had some effect on the war. We were ourselves.
As students, you were a student at
Well,
that point?
I was a professor here.
You were a
already.
professor,
I was
okay.
already a tenured professor.
Oh, okay.
And so from 74 on, I think the biggest passion of my life has been the spiritual search, the quest, but also the private times of just finding out who I am and what life's about. So I love teaching it. I love the sense that when people get together in a classroom, everybody's so able to discover things in their own lives already, that they've already experienced. It isn't like they have to reach some goal out there or hear some words for the first time. I really try to emphasize how important it is to take account of your own already accumulated greatness and the experiences you've had that you just haven't quite dealt with, just because they're sort of tucked away, but they're great. You just have to bring them out into the light of day.
So that must keep things really fresh for you
Oh,
as a
definitely.
professor, because you're constantly hearing and drawing on
Absolutely.
these personal experiences from your students.
Oh, I love that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's never
Never a dull
two
moment.
classes. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Can you please describe for us a little about the range of topics you cover in your class?
Well, we cover the process of initiation. We read books like Siddhartha by Hesse. We read some contemporary teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh or the Dalai Lama. We read spiritual autobiographies, and we read about non-ordinary experience. We read the Prophet. I mean, we read things that are reminders, really, in all these different ways of what it is we are about. And again, not that they need to learn something new, but that they need to recognize something that's already true for them and in them.
So we use the term non-ordinary experience. Could you describe a little about what you mean by that and give us some examples of what you do with your students?
Sure, I'd be delighted.
As
Actually, the first thing that I really got involved with was I heard that there were these two scientists out of Stanford who were doing something which came to be called remote viewing. And it's a very simple process. Somebody sits in a little room, and somebody else wanders off into the immediate surroundings, or is told specifically to go to a specific place. And it turns out that some people are incredibly good at just sitting in the room and having a picture kind of come to their mind about what's going on for this other person. So we decided, well, we'll just try it ourselves. We'll replicate it if we can. And I wasn't the only one, but I had experiences where I knew exactly where this student was driving. You know, I could tell you all the turns she took when she got to the target and what she found when she got there. You know, there were, and I think for all of us, we kind of know, well, it may be true, it's pretty convincing, but I have to see it for myself. So, you know, not everybody in the class will see it for themselves, but a lot will. Just yesterday in the class, it's a fairly new class and it goes by very fast, but there are, say, 25 students or 26, and they split up into pairs. They just sat with each other for about 10 minutes. And then one of the two went off wandering around to see what they could find that was distinctive. And the other one just sat there quietly, registering whatever their impressions were. So at the end, before they haven't come back to class yet, we'll talk about it on Tuesday, but I told them to email me what was their experience.
Okay.
So here's a report from one of the students who's from China. She was paired up with another student in the class, and she wrote this pretty excited email. She said, there were two things that I found most striking. I decided to go to the bell tower and take the stairs to the top. About halfway up the tower, I was extremely out of breath and tired. Margaret, who was the person who stayed behind to see what she was experiencing, had been keeping timestamps on her sheets of paper, and around the time that I would have been climbing up the tower, she wrote down on her paper, out of breath.
Really?
The second thing that seemed really amazing to me was that as I was walking back, I looked closely at the front of the Michigan League. When I got back, Margaret showed me a drawing that looked exactly like the front of the League and told me that she had seen the image very clearly. So, you know, even if half the students didn't have any experience like that, to be sitting in the classroom.
Even if one did.
Yeah, even one. Usually, I mean, I got this kind of report from about half the students. The other half said, well, I don't know, you know. But it doesn't matter, you know. It makes a huge difference that you see this is not something that you read in a book, but that, you know, we have these experiences. We know who's on the telephone before we pick up the phone, or we know when our dogs know when we're coming home, but long before we've even, you know, been a mile away, they're all excited to see us come home. So we study things like that. We study remote viewing. We study how, you know, in the simplest terms, we do know the future. We are influenced by things that haven't even happened yet.
So precognition?
Precognition.
We call that?
So you could show people pictures, and if it's a scary picture, their body will react. And if it's a calm picture, they won't react. But even before it's been chosen by a computer, are you going to show the subject a scary picture or a calm picture? The subject's body is already reacting as if they were seeing a scary picture before the computer has even said, okay, show a scary picture, and then they see the picture.
So that's the precognition you're
That's right. People know they're somehow influenced by the future. We study that. We study how healing and the ability of what we sort of crudely call mind over matter. The human consciousness, human mind is able to influence what we sometimes say, well, that's a really different thing called the physical world. How can the mental world influence the physical world? Well, all of those distinctions are breaking down because it turns out that's what I mean by non-ordinary, because usually you can't or you don't, but every once in a while...
Or we don't think we can.
We don't think we can.
Right, we don't think in those terms.
That's what healers do. They somehow get in a place in relation to a human body so that the body restores itself to health. Or people will sit in a little prayer group in Texas and be given the name of somebody, you know, who's in the hospital ward in California, and the person in California doesn't know he's being prayed for, but he is. He's in the half of the group that's being prayed for. The other half on that same ward are not. And when you go to look at how that half that's been prayed for by people all over the country, they actually do better. Their health is better. They get out quicker. They have fewer remissions. So that kind of healing, you know, consciousness, there's no end to that kind of research. And then it just gets on from there. It's people have near-death experiences, experience just amazing things that, while they're really clinically dead.
Technically dead,
they're dead,
but there's a time between.
Yeah, I mean, they'll talk about how they kind of went up and in the air and they saw everything that was happening to their body, and then they leave that room and they go up and they're sort of floating around over the hospital, and they see things which, since they do recover, the ones that we hear it from, they recover and they come back and they say, well, look for a tennis shoe that was on the ledge of on the fifth, way up high on the hospital building. So they go and they look, and there it is. There's the tennis shoe with a little hole in the, right by the big toe.
So the out-of-body experiences.
Out-of-body experiences.
It's kind of like remote viewing in a way.
That's right. It really is. And then by now there's a very important area of research which is studying what mediums report. How is it? Is it just that mediums say sort of vague things like, your grandmother appeared to me and she said she loves you, which everybody would say, oh, that's so right on.
That must be Grandma.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it turns out that if you take all the things that a medium says to one person and show that whole description to that person, but also to somebody else, the person it wasn't for will say, yes, that's right, to about 20% of the things that the medium says. But the person it really is for will say yes to about 80% of the things that the medium says. So mediums say very specific things that aren't just vague and general.
So how do they scientifically track something like that? Aside from just report.
Well, that's what this man Gary Schwartz did. He wrote a book called The Afterlife Experiments. He's a professor at Arizona. He was at Yale for many years, and he's a very well-regarded cognitive psychologist. He's had hundreds of articles written and published. He decided, well, I'm going to take these great mediums like John Edward and John Anderson and Suzanne Northrup, and I'm just going to bring them in the laboratory. So there's no question that they haven't edited the thing around, the two right things and everything else is thrown away. Just do the scientist thing of record everything that's said and make it so they can't even see the person that they're reading. So that they say, well, maybe they're sort of picking up subtle cues, the body or the tone of voice. Well, then, systematically as a scientist, you say, well, you won't even be able to see the person, or you won't even be able to ask questions other than yes or no, or you can't even ask questions for the first part of the reading. And it turns out that this 80% rate stays right up there, no matter whether they haven't even met the person sometimes. They just come up with all this information. Only now, you can begin to do the test, which sort of says, you can actually put the person on the other side of the screen. It isn't even the person who's being read. There's somebody sitting in for them, and even so, the medium gets it right. It isn't. It's not mind reading because they're not in contact. There's no mind over there that's being read. It's somebody they've never met, and they don't even know who it is.
So they've been incrementally upped the ante with these experiments to make them more and more rigorous to help rule out possibility of coincidence.
And they should. After all, we're right. There are sometimes people say, oh, that was amazing because I had a dream and then it came true. Well, it turns out if you do careful research, a lot of people have dreams that come true. There are people, dreaming is just one of the ways that we get into a different state of consciousness. And it turns out that in some ways we're in touch with things that haven't even happened yet, or things that we have no way of knowing about.
So there's one thing is to do the research to actually confirm that these things happen.
Right.
How do they explain them? Like what?
Well, of course, that's where we are. We're at the place where the scientists who are credible have pretty much agreed there's something very important going on. But how will you explain it? Well, you'll hear in the sort of scientific literature various probes that say, well, maybe what we're finding out in the subtle world of quantum physics, something about that the weirdness of quantum physics is related to the weirdness of just knowing something you have no business knowing. There's something about the immense possibilities. I think we get amazed by things because we buy into the idea that this is really what's happening, that there's you and there's me, and how can I know what your experience is? But what if we're just like the tippy tip of the iceberg, and there's this huge reality that we can't perceive?
Or we don't typically perceive.
I mean, maybe we
we're not
even
trained
can't.
to. Or
We just can't in the normal sense of perceiving. Like the light that we see, the range of visible light, is like a millionth of the range of what light really is. So we live in this world and we say, well, this and this. But so the first thing is just to give up the idea that the world we experience in time and space and the senses that we have is sort of the basis of our reality.
Okay.
But there's this huge reality, that there's an interconnectedness between things, which is, again, absolutely characteristic of things in the quantum world, that there's a simultaneity about things that's very different from the this causing that of the sort of the Newtonian physics lab, where this influences that. This is this world now. I mean, all the scientists are all sort of converged on. There's sort of what we call non-local connections. That everything is simultaneously present to everything at the same time.
When you say all the scientists,
well, in this domain, sort of like that. Well,
the
even
physicists.
Even yeah, I mean, it turns out the physicists are the most open.
Really interesting.
Unfortunately, my team, which is psychologists, we're the least open
really?
to all of this. We don't want to hear about that. But the physicists, the biologists, the engineers.
Can you name like some of the top researchers that are doing this and tell us more about their research?
Gary Schwartz is the most extraordinary, I think, one today.
Is he a physicist?
He's a psychologist.
Okay, so he's in your camp.
He's the one, yeah.
He's a crossover.
Well, yeah, he's a crossover. He is definitely a good guy.
Okay.
Dean Radin is another psychologist who works in California at the Noetic Science group. They're very, very careful experimenters, and they have a great capacity to design research so that the thing, well, maybe it's this, gets sort of knocked out. You know? No, we tried that. It can't be that. That can't be that. So there's sort of like this probing, is this thing for real? So here's an example. I mean, it is mind-blowing. Schwartz just wrote a new book called The Sacred Promise. And in this book, basically, you'd have to read it just to kind of get the details, but he decided, well, what if you could converse with spirit in the laboratory and ask spirit to do something that's measurable, not, your grandmother and her Pekingese dog. This is like, show up and do something. So here's a box, which is absolutely light proof. There's no light, almost no light going on in there.
Okay.
So you get a medium who's in touch with somebody on the other side. It may be a person who once was a medium herself, like Susie Smith, or it may be a saint, or it might be, it's like you just show up and do whatever you can do inside this box. Well, it turns out that if you observe what's going on inside the box for 30 minutes, nothing, and then they say, okay, now's your time for the next 30 minutes. When you look at what's going on in the box, there's this illumination inside the box. Leaves begin to glow that are sitting inside this box. Checkerboards that are white and black sort of begin to show that they're, it's like, then it gets so objective. It's like there's no, well, maybe this or maybe that. Either there's more protons bouncing around in there or there isn't.
So they're putting things inside the box and they're able to observe what's going on inside the box. How do they do that?
They just get a little probe, stick it inside the box. And for example, one of the experiments, it just counts the number of protons that are bouncing around in there.
Oh, I see.
Usually there's like 5 per whatever it is, some period of time. And then you just ask spirit. That's the way they talk about it.
So set the intention, put out the intention.
Right, and in that period, that's where they're supposed to be there. Instead of being 5, it's like 80.
So they can measure that. Are they able to actually photograph changes? Are they able to visually see?
They can measure all these things. They can even take a photograph of the glow of this leaf. It just starts to glow during the time period when some spirit on the other side has been told, show up. Well, now to me that's way beyond what I could imagine is possible. So I'm just being dragged along, just like everybody else. And everybody sort of can get so far. Well, I know you might know who's on the telephone, but the rest of that, I don't know. Or somebody, so everybody, all of our limits are being tested all the time. Like, wow, you know, this is really careful research.
Tell us more about the remote viewing that you had mentioned before about the outer space. And
there was a time when this research by these guys, Puthoff and Targ at Stanford, was in the published literature. And then about late 70s, it vanished. We just had to keep, well, why aren't they publishing? Maybe their research pooped out. But it turned out that the Army and the NSA and CIA had come along and hired these guys and told them that what they were doing was secret. So that in Virginia, they had a little hut. They had these very highly trained people who were all in the Army, and they would sit in this hut and be assigned the task of just going to this latitude and this longitude and seeing what they could see. So the guy, who was actually a guy named Pat Price, he was a police chief, he sits over there and he says, well, I see this huge structure. And they say, yeah, we know about the structure because we fly our U-2 plane over it and we know it. Go inside the structure. Well, it turns out that just by moving his sense of where he is, he's inside this structure where the Russians are building their latest top secret atomic submarine.
so he's going in actually like
He's
a spy.
He's a psychic spy, absolutely. And this was, you know, when the Red Brigade captured a major general in Rome, they had these guys in Virginia trying, where is he, where is he, where is he? And they came up with, well, he's riding around all around Rome in the trunk of a car. Well, that's what he really was doing. You know, they'd captured him. The Red Brigade captured him and were driving him around in the trunk of a car. And eventually he was rescued. And he said, yeah, that was what's happening. So, so then you think, well, now what's the limit of this thing? So there's a guy named Ingo Swann, and they said, Ingo, how about being able to go to Jupiter? Why don't you go just sort of like, you know, instead of what's happening on the other side of the Earth, what's happening at Jupiter? So he did. He had a session where he described what oh yeah, okay, now I'm seeing, and he saw like rings around Jupiter, and he saw ice crystals forming around here, and he saw various things. And when they checked with the astronomers, they said, no, that's not really what Jupiter's like. And I mean, no, because we've got a probe. In 2 years, it'll arrive in Jupiter, and we'll know how ridiculous that is. 2 years later, the Jupiter probe gets to Jupiter, and all those things that he said were true, that the astronomers had never heard of, turned out to be true. So what does that mean? I mean, something about this one guy, an artist who works for the UN, he sits in his little room, and he's somehow connected to what's going on Jupiter. Well, you know, it just makes you stop and think that there's this vast capacity we have to know things. Well, you know, that's so then people go out and they find sunken treasures, and the Alexandria Library got found that way.
Really? The remote viewing?
Yeah, by remote viewing.
No
they didn't know
kidding.
where it was, and these remote viewers would just go out there and say, and
That
they
could
would
be a real interesting tool for
It
an
was.
archaeologist to
Absolutely, that's exactly right. And
Wow.
they do also find galleons
Interesting.
sunken off some island in the Caribbean.
And you're teaching your students how to do this at U of M.
And
huh?
I'm teaching them how they're halfway up the bell
The
tower.
bell tower.
They're getting exhausted, and somebody in the classroom is thinking, I'm out of breath. Well, what does that mean, you know?
I guess most of us just, well, don't even know we have this capacity,
No.
and if we do, we don't think that it's really that valuable,
Yeah.
or really practice it
Right.
to
Yeah,
develop
it's true.
it.
It's true.
These are skills that can be developed, though, right?
No question about it. I mean, some
So
people are
practice
probably
like anything else.
Yeah, and really what practice means is getting the clutter out of our mind. I mean, what's characteristic of these people is they have very still minds. When they settle to concentrate on something, they can concentrate. The rest of us, if we sat to try and concentrate, we'd just be, you know, be all this static in the system.
What do you think is the best way to develop that, to clear the mind?
Well, there are, I mean, many cultures, maybe all cultures, have ways of breathing, of repeating mantras,
Meditation.
of meditation, of music, or sitting by a river, or, I mean, we all know we have our ways of reaching that quiet place for ourselves. And what's amazing is to be able to do it in the midst of a, you know, come on, quick, we got to find out where the Major General is.
Right.
And they're still sitting there very quiet. You know, there's this guy in town this weekend, his name is Davidson, he's at Wisconsin. And he studied these really great meditators. They've been meditating for 20, 30, 40 years in Asia. And he brings them over to his laboratory. One of the things that's characteristic of them is that their minds are so still. You know, they react, when things happen, they react, but they don't, you know, the reaction is appropriate for the moment and then it dies right out. And if you tell them that in a minute, you know, you're going to give them a really hard wallop of heat, it's going to hurt. Ordinary people, for that whole minute, they're going, oh my God, I hope it doesn't hurt. Oh my God. They're sitting there just, and their whole physiology, their brain is just really steady. And then they get a wallop and they go, ow, you know, like anybody else. But within 20 seconds instead of like 2 minutes, they've calmed down again. So that's a skill, the ability to be really present. It isn't like being so fogged out that nothing gets to you. Things get to them, but they don't worry about it and they don't ruminate about it. I mean,
so what sounds like what you're describing are Jedi masters.
Yes, they are. That's right. They're Jedi masters.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a little bit of a Jedi master in all of us. So
I'd like to think that there is.
I would too. And I do.
So these experiments you're describing are really fascinating, and I'm sure that any one of us could spend a whole lifetime keeping up with all of this new knowledge. So how does this actually impact one on a spiritual level, like a personally, you know?
Well, you know, in some ways, most spiritual traditions have an attitude toward these kinds of amazing or miraculous or non-ordinary things, which is, don't pay much attention to it. It's not that important. It's a little trick. And it is, compared to the main goal of a spiritual path.
So I guess it's like any other tool that you could use these gifts, these skills to become, to grow spiritually or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really what you do with it.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Doesn't necessarily take you down a path because you're, you know, develop your remote viewing.
No,
You could even be a really bad person.
You could be, well, maybe you could. I hope not, but yeah, you probably could.
A Darth Vader,
a
you know.
Darth Vader, oh.
Could be.
Yeah.
So if you were to leave our viewers with a few questions to ponder, with all that we've talked about, what would they be?
Who am I? And it's a question that you can ask over and over. I mean, you come up with an answer, well, you know, I'm a professor, I'm a this, I'm a, and then sort of like turn on that answer and say, yeah, okay, that's true, but is there more? You know, who am I really? And who am I really? And I suppose the complementary question is, what's the deal? Just, I mean, really, what's the deal? It seems, not just how does it seem, but if you probe even harder, if you just keep harder, you know, what is the deal?
What are we doing here?
What's the deal? Just how does this all work? How are we going to think about it? How are we going to live in it?
So, Ann Arbor, what's the deal?
Yeah, what's the deal?
Thank you, Professor Mann, for being here tonight.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thank you, Ann Arbor, for joining us. Remember to tune in the second and fourth Tuesday of each month at 10:30 p.m. or look for rebroadcasts of Jeannie on the Beat at various times throughout the week. Ciao, Ann Arbor.